Today is the last day, and what is it that we're taking back with us? Was it just entertainment for 5 days, or is it the beginning of a wonderful journey that we are undertaking? So what did we start with? Do you remember? On the very first day, we started with the thought, what does the Bhagavad Gita do for us here in Mumbai in 2005? So, what did we start with? The Bhagavad Gita helps you to transform from an ordinary mortal human being into an extraordinary person. And for which, what do you need to change? Your thinking, your thoughts. Today we are entertaining enervating thoughts, small thoughts, petty thoughts, and therefore we become limited, small individuals. You have to think big. And the moment you change your thinking, your entire personality transforms, the world in which you live changes, the whole thing changes. And how long does it take? Not very long. So you have to refresh your mind with fresh ideas, with new thoughts, with invigorating thoughts. But our policy is we've all become a generation of conformists. To think differently is considered taboo. How can you think differently from the majority? And the majority must necessarily be mediocre. So once you become a conformist, from making the laws, you bow down to them. From looking at solutions, your focus is on problems. As borrowing cricket terminology, because there's cricket all around here, from you worry about getting out rather than scoring runs. Your focus is on the fielders, not the gaps between the fielders. And so the next challenge becomes, you grow weary of battle. The next challenge becomes insurmountable. So it's all in the mind. And what has transformed the Indian cricket team in a matter of days, from a losing team, from a team that was totally disparate, there was no unity between them, there was no team spirit, nothing. Now it's a completely different team. What you need to remember is that the players are more or less the same. The players haven't changed, it's the thinking that's changed. So the top stars in any field begin to stagnate when they allow, or when they don't allow, fresh thoughts to come in. And so it's very important that you keep an open mind. It's very important that you expose yourself to these higher values, not once in a while, not occasionally, but every single day. And if you don't do that, the decline begins very fast. It's like, the city of Mumbai has an energy, has a vibrancy, has an activity and dynamism which perhaps other cities in India don't have. So when you move from Mumbai to another city, you live there for a while, you start slowing down like them. And then when you come back to Mumbai, you understand that, oh, I've slowed down. So it's like this. When you don't expose your mind to higher values, you degenerate, and that is, the slowing down is almost instantaneous. There's a movie called The Legend of Bagavans. It's an outstanding movie it's a Hollywood movie. But it's about a golfer who's allowed himself to degenerate because of his negative thinking. He's an outstanding golfer. He goes to war, comes back, and something goes wrong in his mind. And he degenerates. He doesn't pick up the game again. And then there's the depression after the World War, after the First World War. There's this depression, and there is an attempt made in Savannah, in the southern state, to revive golf. And so there's a competition. And this young man, his name is Arjuna. Arjuna. It's deliberately made like that, Arjuna, to sound like Arjuna. And his guru, the caddy, his name is Bhagavan. Yeah, this is not my concoction, that's how it's been deliberately made. And the producer of the movie is not an Indian, is Robert Redford, an American. So, when the competition is on, he is the local hero and all the people are rooting for him. They want him to participate because who wants an outsider to come? And that's when his first answer is, I've lost my swing. I've lost my form. I've lost it. To which this guru, he just walks into his life, the caddy. You understand what caddy, golf you understand? Caddy is a guy who carries around your golf clubs. So the caddy comes there and says, he presents his own life, the whole situation, from a completely different viewpoint. And this is what we mean by refreshing thoughts. And that these new thoughts make this man stop and think. For the first time in several years, he's begun to think. Because when the degeneration starts, he starts drinking, he becomes almost an alcoholic, he's a waster. And here comes a person who shows confidence in him, who tells him that, look, you haven't lost your swing, you can regain it. And he introduces the concept of a higher ideal. He says, look, okay, even if you don't want it for yourself, do it for the people of Savannah. Look around you. These people adore you. These people admire you. They love you. And they want you to win. And at some stage he gets insulted. This is the worst, You allow petty little stupid things to come and interfere with your mission in life. Somebody comes and insults him and he decides to give up and he's driving away. He's given up. He tells the caddy, he says, look, you're jobless now, you don't have anything to do because I've decided to quit. And as he's driving away, he sees the public and the adoration and the confidence that they have in him. And he then realizes that he has an obligation. And that's when he begins to regain his swing. And it's a wonderful movie. So the Gita is all about that. Arjuna has lost his swing. He's given up his bow and arrow. And so have we all. Every one of us is so talented, so gifted. Every one of us is born with a particular mission in life, a particular gift to contribute to the world and make the world a better place to live in. And all that you and I can think of is, oh, this fellow insulted me and that fellow ditched me and this happened and that happened and my neighbor is against me. That's all. You can't think beyond the tips of your noses. Anybody who sets aside all of this and fixes a higher ideal, has a vision and works for it, by God, what a difference it makes to his life and to the life of everybody else. The few people, you don't need very many people to tip the balance. You need a handful of people. And these handful of people, if there are 5 people in this auditorium who will leave today with a higher vision, believe me, the country, the complexion of the country will change. Complexion of the world will change. This is the power of the thinking. But we are so scared to leave the safe confines of our limited, petty, silly thinking. And the moment a higher ideal is presented before us, what do? We give it up. Because we say, no, I'm like that only. I can't change. This is not the dignity and prestige of a human being. A human being is made to not only change, but to bring about change. Be the change agent, not the victim of change. So if you are not a change agent, you will become the victim of change. You have no choice. This is the only choice available. So, how do you live life is the question. And the Gita in the 5th chapter, which we did 2 years ago, brings about this wonderful concept called Padmapatram Ivambhasa. How must you live your life? A sannyasi is one who is not removed from life. A sannyasi is one who doesn't give up living. A sannyasi is one who lives life like the rest of us. But the difference being, he lives life like a lotus leaf in water. Padmapatra, lotus leaf, ambhasa, in water. Have you ever seen a lotus leaf in water? You know, the problem is in this city of Mumbai, other than concrete buildings, we don't see anything. But those of you who have seen a lotus leaf in water, it is born in muck, it exists in that water, and it dies in the water. But right through its existence, it is not even touched by the water. Why? Because it has a greasy surface that protects it from the water. So it remains immaculate, it remains pure right through its existence. Krishna says, a sannyasi is one who lives life like that. He's born in this world, he transacts with the world, he interacts with the world, he acts, he has relationships, he has intellectual ideas and ideologies, but right through his existence, he lives life like this lotus leaf in water. He's untouched by any of it. You remember the insulation that we were speaking of yesterday. And how do we live life? We live life like, what is that? Double-sided sticky tape. One side is bad enough, the double-sided, that means wherever you go, you get attached. You get bound, you get stuck. Even here, someone came and told me, what a pity, is the 5th day. I didn't even realize 5 days had passed. Means what? You got attached. But don't get detached so quickly. You've got a few more hours to go. You start business, you get attached to it. You get job, you get attached to it. You get married, so don't talk. Complete destruction. You have children, then superlative destruction. Destruction in terms of attachment. So when you get stuck to objects and beings around you, you lose your freedom. You get weighed down by not by the people around you, but by your wrong association, wrong identification, the wrong relationship, which you have established. It's nobody's fault except yours. That shift from this double-sided sticky tape to lotus leaf is the entire spiritual journey. And once you get to this state, at least once you get the taste of what detachment is, then your body, mind and intellect, which has now become a prison, the very instruments become vehicles for self-transcendence. And it becomes a wonderful life. A wonderful life unfolds before you because the same body which has bound you today, the same mind that has completely finished you off with attachments, the same intellect which is so full of prejudices and preconceived notions, now gets freed to explore into higher realms. And then what happens? The first thing that happens is your contact with the world, your relationship with the world, your interaction with any aspect of the world becomes free from friction, free from stress, free from pressures. Today you experience that pressure. The moment you embark on the spiritual path, it's not that you stop living life. Life becomes free from friction. The next thing that happens is your thoughts shift beyond the world to that which is transcendental, like Buddha. See, we tend to believe that it's only when you have a problem, only when things go wrong in your life that you turn to religion. Many years ago, when I was inspired by the spiritual path and used to go and talk to people, that first look at me in complete amazement. I was much younger then. And then look at me and say, what is your problem that you have taken to this field? You don't need to have a problem. Buddha had everything going for him. He was the heir to the kingdom, he had wonderful parents, he had a beautiful wife, he had a son. But that mumukshatva, that urge, the thoughts shifted beyond the world. And then, please understand this, once you get this, once the bug bites you, you can't go back to materialistic living. You just can't do it. However difficult it may be, and it is difficult, because you always feel the drag of the senses. You feel weighed down by desires, and as you proceed, you always cast fond glances to your erstwhile life and say, how nice it was when I was going to nightclubs and discotheques and parties, but you've passed that. It's as ridiculous as after becoming an adult looking into your childhood and saying what fun I had in the 3rd standard in school. Yes, you had fun, but you can't go back. You can only move forward. And as you proceed on this path, you completely shift to the 4th plane of consciousness. And this movement to the 4th plane of consciousness is like when you are awake now, and particularly if you've had a pretty rough day, after some time you'll find the environment is so conducive, dim lights, air conditioning, just right air conditioning, fortunately today. And the rest of it that you tend to doze off. And when you doze, you're dozing off maybe for just 2 minutes, but then you have created an entire dream world and a dream experience which you believe has lasted for a fairly long time. And what do you dream? You dream that you just heard that a gentleman won 1 crore in this, KBC2. So that's going on in your mind. These undigested thoughts in the waking world come up in the dream. So in the dream, right now when you're sitting here, 2 minutes that you dozed off, you project a dream in which what's happened? You are a contestant in KBC2, you've gone there and you are sitting there and you smash up, you go through all the questions, you sail through them without taking even one lifeline. And you hit the jackpot, 2 crores you've won. And you're shaking hands with Amitabh Bachchan and you're taking the check and you're so overwhelmed because in your life you have never seen a check with that many zeros. So you're so overwhelmed by the check that you trip. Where is all this taking place? In the dream. You trip in the dream and then what happens? You wake up. Now, extend this, just extend your imagination a bit. Having woken up, with the knowledge of the waking state, if you were to re-enter the same dream, which doesn't happen, it's not possible, but we're just positing it. Suppose you were to re-enter the same dream where you've tripped and you pick yourself up, look at the check, look at Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, what would you do? Would you be excited? Would you say it's all a dream, you can keep the check and walk out? No. What would you do? You'd just go along with the dream. You take the check, you go and encash it, you use the money, you enjoy yourself, you throw a party, you do everything, you play the rules of the game. With one difference. What is that difference? You're detached. You're not affected by any of it. Why is it that you're detached? What gives you this objectivity with reference to the dream? Knowledge of the waking. If you did not have knowledge of the waking before you tripped, what was your experience? You were so excited, so, you were subject to the ups and downs of the dream's world. A minute later, when you have knowledge of the waking and you have re-entered the dream, you understand that everything in the dream is worthless. That check for 2 crores in the dream state cannot be converted into the currency of the waking state. With reference to the waking state, the currency of the dream state is zero. This is the state of realization. This is the experience of a realized soul who's moved to the fourth plane of consciousness and comes back to us. He lives like us, he eats, he works, he experiences the joys and sorrows, the ups and downs of life like any one of us. The only difference is that he is not hit by it. He is not affected by it. He doesn't get crushed by these experiences. Whereas you and I get crushed by the slightest thing that goes wrong in our lives. And when you get hit, you must understand this is part of life. You cannot escape these happenings in your life except by only one method, and that is waking up to the fourth plane of consciousness. So what he says is, get inspired by Krishna's life. Krishna went through life exactly like the rest of us, but nothing touched him, nothing affected him. Nothing could affect his cheer, his dynamism, his high spirits. Now, because we don't have high spirits, we have to borrow spirit. So, in the Kathopanishad, now you might think that this is the exclusive privilege of a few highly sattvic people, the sannyasis who are meditating in the Himalayas. No. There is no exclusivity about Vedanta, about the fourth plane of consciousness. It is available to one and all. You must just want it, and you must be prepared to pay the price. So in the Kathopanishad, he says, Nachiketa attained Brahman. Nachiketa was a child, a young boy, who with the courage of his conviction approached Lord Yama, the god of death, for Brahma Vidya, and had the consistency and hard work to go through with it, till at the end of the Kathopanishad, it is said that Nachiketa attained Brahman, and then they add, so can anyone else. And this is so encouraging for us that we will, you see, the problem is, if you think that it cannot be done, if you think that it's difficult, you won't even try. And that's what's happening to all of us. You come here and you say, oh, very nice, 7th chapter of the Gita. When are you taking 8th chapter? That's all there is. How many of us say, let me go back and implement. Let me go back and put it in my life. Even if I can take one step forward, it's still a step forward towards that end. And then what you need to understand is, in order to achieve that, the key is the two words, samam, equanimity of mind, and the second is sarva bhuta hite rataha, the ability to rejoice in the welfare of all beings, the ability to engage in the welfare of all beings. This is something that we don't have at all. You see a person suffering, how can you not feel for the person? Just feel. You don't have to do anything. Just feel. And you see someone who's doing well, how can you not enjoy, how can you not participate in the person's happiness? If you don't have these two, which is calmness of mind and sarva bhuta hite rataha, the ability to feel a sense of oneness with people. See, these two qualities are not only the end, this is the test of perfection, but it also is the pathway. As you go along in the spiritual path, you can gauge how much you've progressed by these two qualities. Then comes the understanding. So somewhere down this journey, you have to be able to understand that Atman is something that pervades every single transaction of yours. Every moment of your existence is supported by Atman. Without Atman, you're totally disabled. And a story in the Kenopanishad, the last chapter of the Kenopanishad, gives a story. And that story gets this message across. The story is that the gods and the demons fought a battle. There was a huge war between the gods and the demons, the gods in heaven and the asuras in hell. And In this battle, the gods won victory over the demons with the help of Brahman. Brahman, God. But when you win victory, you tend to forget all the people who helped you gain that victory. And so did the gods also. The gods, when they won the victory, they call, when you win something, what do? You call for a celebration, you throw a party, and during the party, they completely forgot Brahman's role in this whole episode. And they were celebrating, they were congratulating each other, they were narrating incidents of that battle and war, and Brahman decided to teach them a lesson. So at a party, what do? Bottoms up. So when this bottoms up was going on, Brahman appeared in the sky as a yaksha. Yaksha, an apparition. And suddenly the god stopped short and said, "My God, what is this?" The fact that they saw something that they did not know was cause for concern, because the gods were supposed to be all-knowing. None of them knew what this apparition was. So they decided to send an emissary to find out what it was. And the first representative they chose was Lord Agni, the god of fire. So Agni approached Brahman, this yaksha. And as Agni, you understand, is a whole element of fire, blazing fire. When it approaches you, you understand it's fire. But here, the yaksha had the audacity to ask Agni, "Who are you?" That itself deflated Agni terribly, because he said, "See, it's like the Prime Minister appearing here and suddenly you turn around and say, 'Who are you?' You can't do that, because everyone knows what the Prime Minister looks like." So Agni is something that you know. Yaksha says, "Who are you?" So he swallowed his pride and said, "I am Agni." The next question shattered his ego completely. He said, "What do you do? What is your vocation in life?" He said, "I can burn the whole universe." So the yaksha placed a trinam, a blade of grass, before Agni and said, "Can you do me a favor? Can you please burn this for me?" Agni took one look at the yaksha and says, "This guy is incorrigible." So he knew that he could burn anything. He released only a few calories, thinking the whole thing will turn to ash in a few seconds. What happened? Nothing happened. The temperature of that blade of grass didn't go up by even 1 degree centigrade. So by now he was mad. He released all his energy. Still nothing happened. He decided to run away from that scene. So he came back, Agni, and told the other gods, he says, "I don't know what that yaksha is." So they decided to send another god. The next one is Vayu. Vayu, wind. When wind approaches you, it's like Hurricane Katrina approaches you. This is miles away, you understand it's wind. This yaksha again had the audacity to ask, "Who are you?" So Vayu said, "I am Vayu." Again, what do? "I can toss the planets around." So he placed a blade of grass before him and said, "Can you blow this away for me?" He tried. Nothing happened. The blade of grass didn't move 1 centimeter. Tried again with all his might. Still nothing happened. Vayu came back and told the other gods, "I don't know what that apparition is, what that yaksha is." Then they realized that, look, this is not an ordinary thing. It requires someone with greater capability. So they sent Indra. When Indra approached the yaksha, this time there was a difference. Indra approached the yaksha with humility. And when Indra approached the yaksha with humility, that yaksha disappeared. This is the end of that chapter. And in the place of yaksha, appeared this resplendent, beautiful Uma. Uma is the daughter of the Himalayas. And Indra asked the question to Uma, so what is it that was here before you came? This is where it's the end of this chapter. The answer to this question is given in the next chapter. All this is significant, that's why I'm telling you. And the beginning of the next chapter, Uma tells him, that which you saw here was Brahman. So, what is the significance behind this whole story? Agni represents organs of action, Vayu represents organs of perception. So, organs of perception, subtler than organs of action, still you can't contact God with organs of perception. And when Brahman decides to switch off, organs of perception are totally disabled. So here organs of action are disabled, organs of perception are disabled. What next? Next you approach with Indra. Indra is the lord of the gods, representing the mind and the intellect. So if you approach the subject, approach God with the mind and intellect, and you approach the subject with humility, then what happens? Brahman disappears, meaning with the mind and intellect you can't feel God, you can't conceive God, but you can indirectly gain knowledge of Brahman, and that is beautifully put by saying that when Indra approached with humility, the Yaksha disappeared, but in its place came Uma, representing the scriptures, daughter of the Himalayas, means this knowledge of Vedanta originated in the Himalayan valleys, where the great sages went and did intense research and came up with their discoveries, which is the science of living that you and I are discussing today. And this knowledge has been flowing since time immemorial. And Uma represents the scriptures. Right through the ages, India has gone through all kinds of changes, traumatic changes. We've gained and lost material wealth and all sorts of things. But there is one thing that we did not allow to disappear, and that is our scriptural knowledge. It is because of the wisdom of our ancestors, where they held on to the knowledge of the scriptures at great risk, and they sacrificed a great deal to preserve it and pass it on to future generations, that you and I are sitting here gaining this knowledge. Therefore, we must do our little bit. We have an obligation to do our bit to ensure that the knowledge does not die and that it passes on to the next generation. Are we doing that is the question that each one of us should ask ourselves. So anyway, that organs of action, Agni, organs of perception, Vayu, mind and intellect, gains this knowledge indirectly represented by the question appearing in the 3rd chapter, the answer given in the beginning of the 4th chapter. Also it means when you gain the knowledge, you have to go through a period of gestation before you start living it. This is the whole subject of this chapter, Jnana Vijnana Yoga. After you gain the knowledge, when you hear and read, you need to mull over this knowledge, you need to reflect over it, contemplate upon it, and only then does it become wisdom. And when it becomes wisdom, you live it, you act on it. This transformation from knowledge to wisdom takes a period of time. During that time, you need to have patience. Don't give up. Don't expect to sprout wings of Vedanta and take off at 8 o'clock today. This doesn't happen. But surely and steadily, the knowledge of Vedanta seeps in and it makes a distinct difference to your life. So, have patience is the message here. Now, yesterday we did verse 24, in which he says the abuddhayaha. 24 to 27, he speaks of why is it that the ignorant people don't seek Atman, because Brahman is hidden. It's camouflaged. You need to, it's like gold. No sample of gold anywhere in the world is there. No gold biscuit is there outside waiting for you to pick it up. You need to mine that gold. You have to go deep into the recesses of the earth, remove that ore, refine it, separate it, and then you've got gold. Similarly, this gold, this treasure that lies within, is hidden. Brahman is hidden. So he says, the abuddhayaha, the foolish, ignorant people, regard me, the unmanifest, as having manifestation, not knowing my supreme state, which is immutable, avyayam, changeless, and anuttamam, unsurpassed, the best, peerless, without uttama. So the thing is, our starting point itself is wrong, because at birth itself we are born without this knowledge, ignorant. And therefore any steps that we take in ignorance will be wrong. Yet we have the arrogance to believe that, see, first of all, this in the absolute state, since we don't know Brahman, everything else becomes wrong. It's like when you're walking out of here, there's a rope lying on the ground. You don't see the rope as a rope and you mistake it for a snake. As long as you're seeing the snake, your whole calculations, your thinking, everything will be wrong. Your pursuit itself will be wrong. Because then you believe the snake is biting you, you believe the poison has entered your system, the poison is going to kill you, and all kinds of fears and imagination you are subject to. All of which is wrong. So what do you have to do? You can't go around looking for, a vaccine for snake venom. You can't do any of that. First thing that you have to do is bring a torch, focus it on the snake that you're seeing. And what happens? Suddenly you become, say, Hare, I don't know how I thought it was a snake. All your problems cease. This is in the absolute. But come to the relative. Even in the relative, we imagine all kinds of things. You don't see things for what they are, and nor are you interested in the truth. We get carried away by what others say. Take your strongest beliefs and examine them. Where did it originate from? Somebody told you. Somebody said so. How do you know that the person has told you the truth? You don't know. And you carry these prejudices, you carry these notions with you. Oh, this one is bad and that one is jealous and that one is ungrateful and this, that and the other. Without thinking. See, even if you start thinking, you'll understand that the truth, the behavior, the conduct of the person is very different from what you've heard. But it doesn't occur to you. The other day someone came and said, my relatives think very badly of me. What do I do? Should I go and clarify? They don't bother clarifying anything. Why? Because their sustenance is based on the wrong concepts that they have about you. If you go and clarify, then the foundation is taken away from them. It's not that they are so unintelligent that they can't figure out the truth. They don't want to know the truth. You see, when you have hatred for somebody, it helps if you believe that the person is vicious. Then you feel justified. But the moment you come to know that the person is really not vicious, he's good, then you have to come to terms with the truth, the bitter truth, that it is me who's harboring the hatred, which you don't want, so let them be. What difference does it make? Somebody wants to be in a deluded state, let them continue in the deluded state. All you have to do is deal with yourself, because there are other issues in which you are as deluded. So, again in the Kenopanishad, he keeps hammering the truth. All the scriptures are scientifically based enunciation of the truth. And that truth sometimes is very bitter. You've got to have the strength, you have to have the courage to face up to the truth about yourself, about the world, about people around you. If you don't have that courage, then you will be deluded and you find solace in the delusion itself. You don't want to know the truth. Now we move to verse 25.
Naham prakashat sarvasya yogamaya samavritaha mudho yam nabhijanati loko mamajavavyayam.
Shrouded by yoga maya, illusion, this deluded world does not know me, the unborn, Ajam, the immutable, Avyayam. So, what he's saying here is what you are seeing is not reality, it's an illusion, it's a projection. It's like this: when you pour colorless water into 3 glasses, red, blue, green, and all your life you're seeing water only through these 3 glasses, red, blue and green, right? So there are 3 different people, each one sees water through a different colored glass. What is your perception of water? You think water, a person drinking who has the red glass will think water is red. So also the one with the blue glass, so also the one with the green glass. You have never seen water minus the red, blue and green glasses. Similarly, you and I are seeing the world, trying to see Brahman through what? Through the 3 equipments of the body, mind and intellect. The body, mind and intellect completely distort your vision of the truth. And this is going on since birth. Therefore he says, this deluded world knows me not. You don't know that water is colorless. Simple fact. So what must you do? You must, if you want to know the color of water, you must smash through the glasses and see, and you understand that water is colorless. Similarly, you must transcend the body, mind and intellect. And then you come to understand Brahman as it is. Until then, you will be shrouded by yoga maya, and you don't understand Brahman as Ajam. When you say don't understand Brahman as Ajam, means you don't understand yourself as Ajam, unborn. How does it? You will say, of course I was born. I'll show you my birth certificate. How do you say I'm unborn? Unborn means no birth, which means no death, which means no change. How is it possible? You go to the ocean, you go to Chowpatty here, and you see the vast expanse of the sea, the ocean. And on the surface of the ocean, you see waves. If you have the time, you go out and see it. It's fascinating. Out of this huge body of water, a little volume of water suddenly decides to come up. It takes a particular form and shape. A wave is born. And then when the wave is born, the wave grows bigger and bigger and bigger and swallows up all the other waves. And at a certain point, it comes crashing down. That's the death of the wave. Right? So, if your focus of attention is on the wave, then you go through traumatic changes. You go through the joy and sorrow and the rest of it when the wave is born, the anxiety, the heartburn. And the wave wants to get bigger and bigger, and the more waves, smaller waves it swallows, the better it is. It gets competitive and feels threatened and gets bigger and bigger. And when it's become biggest wave there, it comes crashing down, death. While all this is going on, you simply have to shift your attention from the wave to the ocean. And then that which was traumatic becomes so enjoyable. Because when the wave is born, you understand what's happened? Nothing has happened. The ocean is still the same. The volume of water in the ocean is the same. Everything about the ocean is the same. No change. When the wave gets bigger and bigger and swallows up other waves, what's happened? Nothing has happened as far as the ocean is concerned. And when the wave dies, still nothing has happened. So what it means is, while your body, mind and intellect, while your personality, which is limited, is going through the 5 metamorphic changes of birth, growth, disease, decay and death, which nobody is exempt from. While all this is going on, it's like the wave. If you shift the focus of your attention from the personality, from the body, mind and intellect to Atman, the ocean, then you enjoy these changes. Every phase of life has a certain beauty about it. Every phase of life is enjoyable. Every phase of life has certain returns. But you don't want it. The modern world only wants to be young forever. So you want to be 16 years old till you are 85 years old. How can that be? Yes, you can. You can remain 16 in spirit till you are 100 years old. But your body can't be the same. Your mind will necessarily refine, change. It's amazing. A grandparent's view of things is so different from a parent's view of things, is so different from the child's view of things. And it is this in the ancient times when there were joint families there. There were 45 members in a family and each one was different. Each one has his or her own idiosyncrasies. Each one had their pluses and minuses. But the whole family lived as a cohesive unit because of this understanding. But today, you want nuclear family. Before a girl thinks of getting married, her first condition is, I will not live with the parents. I will not do this, I will not do this, all kinds of conditions. Why? Because we've lost that flexibility, we've lost this understanding. The moment you understand it, you don't resist the process of aging. But what you ensure is that you prevent the aging process from hitting your spirit. What is happening now is you're trying to keep the body young till 80, but your spirit is old even at 16. Because at 16 people are saying, I'm bored with life. I'm depressed. Forget 16, children are getting depressed. So that's the problem. And Ajam, at any stage in your life, shift the focus of your attention to this underlying reality and you will retain your youth right through life. This is what he's saying here. Ajam, avyayam, imperishable. The changes go on, but like even physics says, matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It merely moves from one form to another. And so is it with us. With Atman. See, it's like this. From the element gold, you make various ornaments. You make a wedding ring, you make a Mangal Sutra, you make bangles, you make this, that and the other. As far as gold is concerned, what has happened? Nothing has happened. Immutable, imperishable. But the ornament is perishable. You give an unnecessary value to the wedding ring. So when things are all right between the husband and wife, it is of great value. When things are not all right, that same wedding ring you look at, it brings back bad memories, you say. As far as gold is concerned, it's nothing, it's immutable. It's the same. So, Ajam and Avyayam, Krishna says this even as Arjuna is listening, because when Arjuna is listening, he views Krishna as a personality with a birth, with a death. He doesn't understand Krishna's real glory, and this is one way of getting him to understand. Not only does Arjuna not understand Krishna's glory, he doesn't understand his own glory. And neither do we. So, he's trying to make us understand this. 26.
वेदाहं समतीतानि वर्तमानानि चार्जुन भविष्याणि च भूतानि मां तु वेद न कश्चन.
I know the beings of the past, present and future, O Arjuna, but no one knows me. When he says, I know me, he's trying to hammer it in. As we've seen earlier, Arjuna looks at Krishna only as a personality. So he's trying to shift his thinking, his identification from the personality to that conscious principle. That conscious principle which makes you aware of whatever it is that you are aware of now in the present is the same consciousness that made you aware of whatever you knew in the past, is the same consciousness that with which you will be aware of whatever knowledge you will gain in the future. Not only with reference to you, all human beings, but all living creatures. So what is he saying here? He says, I am the conscious principle which makes all living beings know whatever it is that they know. Not only in the present, past, future. As against that, what is it that you know? You only know that one limited small little sphere of activity that you are engaged in at the moment, in the present. When he says present, you extend it to include present life. You don't know your past, you don't know the future. Forget the past life and future life. In a span of 24 hours, you and I go through 3 states of consciousness. The waking state, in which we are all in now. If I continue much longer, some of us will shift to the dream state, and some others, if I continue still further, deep sleep state. Has it ever occurred to you that at any given point in time, you know only one state? Right now, you know only the waking state. Then when you move to the dream state, you know only the dream state, and you reject the waking state and the deep sleep state. In the deep sleep state, you experience nothingness, you reject both the waking and the dream states. That is why in the Atma Bodha, he says, Pratasmarami rudisam spuradatma tattvam satchit sukham paramaham sagatim turiyam yat swapna jagara sushuptamaveti nityam. That which knows the waking, dream and deep sleep states is what he's speaking of here. I know the beings of the past, present and future, O Arjuna, but no one knows me. 27.
इच्छा द्वेष समुत्थेन द्वन्द्व मोहेन भारत सर्वभूतानि सम्मोहम् सर्गे यान्ति परन्तप.
Deluded by the pairs of opposites, born of desire and hatred, O Bharata, all beings fall into illusion at birth, O Parantapa, scorcher of foes. So what he's saying here is, it is this preferential likes and dislikes, ichha, dvesha, attraction and repulsion. What happens is, you're born with these likes and dislikes, and during your lifetime, unintelligently, you add to the likes and dislikes, you strengthen the likes and dislikes. And then what happens? To that extent, you get crushed because the world is full of pairs of opposites. So you will be happy only when the world caters to your likes and the world does not present what you dislike. But this doesn't happen. This happens, but not all the time. So when you are faced with what you dislike, you are in distress. But what you don't understand is the world can't cater to you all the time. If you get one, something else doesn't happen. Like, in Washington DC one year, there was a lady, a fairly elderly lady, who kept complaining, my husband, he's a research scientist, he sits there in his lab 18 hours a day, 20 hours a day, he doesn't bother about me. He does, this is her constant refrain. Then somebody reminded her, one of the other members reminded her, oh, but you don't understand, your husband is so brilliant, he's about to get the Nobel Prize. He's knocking at the doors of the Nobel Prize. He says, yeah, he's brilliant, but what use is it to me? Suppose, okay, what is she asking for? She's asking that the husband should spend time with her, should be with her all the time. Suppose there's another lady, same place, Washington DC, who has a husband who's jobless. He's sitting at home all the time. She's complaining, oh, what to do, this fellow doesn't go out. So if you have one, you don't have the other. If you have a servant who's sharp, intelligent, that usually he turns out to be a crook. And if you have a very honest servant, I can leave whatever my whole assets with him, complete dud. You can't have everything in life. So what do? You have to rise above the likes and dislikes, ichcha and dvesha, and operate with the intellect. You have no idea what this ichcha and dvesha, the likes and dislikes, do to your personality. They completely distort you. They distort your vision of things. Can you imagine wearing glasses? Once it happened to me. When I started wearing glasses, which is recently, a few years ago, for reading, and then slowly the distance also came in. So the optician gave me glasses and he made some mistakes. So wherever I looked, instead of seeing straight lines, I was seeing things like this. The computer screen looked like this. I said, have I gone mad or what's happening? Then when I went back, they said, oh, I'm so sorry, we made a mistake. So likes and dislikes, ichcha and dvesha are such that inherent in you, they distort things in the mind. And thereafter you don't see things straight. Everything you see is crooked. There's a gentleman here, anybody he comes across, he says, this fellow is a crook. The whole world is a crook for him because his perception is like that. The mind is like that. Someday you have to be able to rise above your likes and dislikes. And when do you do that? Only when your intellect is reinforced. The intellect is strengthened enough to be able to set aside your likes and dislikes and see the world, see the truth for what it is, not what you want to see. At least this much you should be able to do. And this intellect is reinforced, as we said earlier, by opening up your intellect to fresh thoughts, thinking about them. Just as your body is strengthened by exercise, your intellect is strengthened by thinking, exercising the intellect. But today, thinking is not there anywhere. Nobody thinks. Nobody wants to think. You want instant solutions. Even corporate executives, occasionally they are interested in Vedanta. When they come, they say, we want a ready-made, model. Ready-made module which I instantly put into practice, which means without thinking I should be able to benefit. How can that happen? So, ichcha and dvesha, deluded by the pairs of opposites born of desire and hatred, O Bharata. All beings fall into illusion at birth, O Parantapa. What terms he uses. He addresses all of us, not just Arjuna, all of us as Bharata. You know, the fundamental thing we don't have is we don't have pride in our culture. We don't have pride in our country. And how can you have pride when you don't know what is the best tradition? What is this culture? You don't know. And therefore it is that we've reached a ridiculous state where in our own country, you have, lounge bars which ban ladies entering it in a sari. That means the Indian dress is banned in a place in India. Have you heard of anything so stupid? Why is this happening? Why is there no pride in the country? Nobody has any pride in the country because you don't know what is best in it. All that you see is muck and dirt and filth, and so you associate India with that filth. And that is why he's referring to us as Bharata. Bharata comes from two words, bha and rataha, which means to rejoice, to revel in the light of Atman, consciousness. This tradition belongs only to India. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. They don't even have a concept of reveling in the light of consciousness. As you begin to understand it, I'm not suggesting that you should wear saris, please. I'm only saying that once you gain pride in the culture, automatically these things are taken care of. If you don't have pride, then you look down on your own self. So what, if you don't have confidence, all the competence is wasted. So anyway, Bharata and Parantapa, scorcher of foes, you have the capacity to battle with and gain victory over the entire world. So what are you sitting here and crying over? The world not catering to you, is what he's saying. 28.
येषां त्वन्तगतं पापं जनानां पुण्यकर्मणां ते द्वन्द्वमोहनिर्मुक्ताः भजन्ते मां दृढव्रताः.
But those people of virtuous deeds whose sin has come to an end, freed from these twin delusions, worship me with determination. These last few verses deal with the last topic, the seventh topic, the wise get liberated. Verses 28 to 30. So what is he saying here? Punya karmanam. There are two kinds of actions that you can do. Punya and papa. So what is punya? Punya is introverted actions which result in the reduction of desires or vasanas. Papa is extroverted activities which result in further adding to your stock of desires or vasanas which agitate your mind. Therefore it's called papa. Sin is not something that happens when you act. Mostly, colloquially, we refer to sin as a particular action. One action is sinful, one action is virtuous. No, it's not that. Sin is mental agitations. When you commit any action, and that action boomerangs back on you as mental agitation, boomerangs back on you as another desire, then it is papa, because it takes you away from Atman. Any action that is introverted, which reduces your desires, takes you towards Atman, and therefore it is called punya. So the sin comes to an end when vasanas end, and vasana comes to an end when you perform punya karmanam, virtuous deeds. And then what happens? Then you get freed from these twin delusions of the pairs of opposites which arise because of ichcha and dvesha, likes and dislikes. So the enemies lie within you, and the enemies are your own likes and dislikes. So therefore, what you must do is this propulsion or likes and dislikes directly propelling you to action must be changed to the likes and dislikes getting scanned by the intellect, and then you perform action based on the wisdom of the intellect and not the impulse of the like and dislike. That's not that difficult. This is the first step. So the next time you feel like doing something, stop, consult your intellect, and then do it if the intellect says so. If the intellect does not sanction it, you must have the strength of your conviction to stop that activity. So, and then he says, worship me with determination, dridhavrataha. All achievers in any field of activity have achieved whatever they've achieved because of this consistency, determination, firm resolve. However brilliant you are, if you perform sporadic actions, it's of no use. So, worship me with determination. The key word here is dridhavrataha, consistent application. Verse 29.
जरा मरण मोक्षाय मामाश्रित्य यतन्ति ये ते ब्रह्म तद्विदुः कृत्स्नम् अध्यात्मं कर्म चाखिलम्.
Those who, taking shelter in me, strive for liberation from old age and death, jara marana mokshaya. They know Brahman, Adhyatma, and all karma in their entirety. So, with this verse, he starts the preparation for chapter 8, which hopefully we'll do next year. And chapter 8 deals with these three concepts: Brahman, Adhyatmam and Karma. So, what is he saying here? Jara means old age. You know, the term geriatrics came from the word Jara. Jara, Marana, Mokshaya. So, old age and death means change. And the sorrow that comes from change. You see, it's not only old age and death that gives sorrow, it is every change. Any change gives sorrow. What we want is a constancy externally in the world. That will never happen. The constancy has to be developed within. Once you develop this inner constancy, then even old age and death don't affect you. So old age and death is not just to be taken literally, but all changes. The 5 metamorphic changes of birth, growth, disease, decay and death, every change gives trouble. Growth is painful. Birth, of course, is painful. Nobody is ever born laughing. We're all born crying. Growth, teenage years are traumatic years, and adulthood is traumatic. Every change is traumatic. Then, of course, decay, disease and death are, of course, traumatic. But who strive for liberation from this, when you understand that as long as you live, you will be subject to these changes. And all that you can do is shift to Atman, and once you identify with Atman, Atman is not subject to any of these changes. So you identify with Atman and enjoy the changes that are taking place objectively. Such people take refuge in me, taking shelter in me. They turn introvert and follow the practices of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. And then they discover this changeless, immortal substratum which is supporting all activities. Then he says, you'll realize Kritstam, you'll realize the entirety. You see, why we're getting disturbed is because we only know a little bit of what's happening. You don't know the entirety. The moment you understand the entirety, you understand this is a beautiful pattern that's going on. It's not chaos. There's a beautiful design to everything that's happening. Just because you happen to be at a particular stage, it gives you suffering, sorrow. So when you know things in the entirety, they stop bothering you. What is the entirety? Brahman, macrocosm. Adhyatmam, microcosm. Karma, gunas. And gunas are the reflecting medium. It's like this. The mighty sun above can be compared to Brahman. And then the individual rays of the sun can be equated to Adhyatmam, Atmam. There's no difference between individual rays and the sun, but it's a difference in terms of point of reference. And then these sun's rays come and hit a reflecting medium, and when they are reflected, then you see. Right? So the reflecting medium is the gunas. There are different reflecting media in the world. There is a dewdrop which reflects a minuscule, small, tiny sun. There is the mighty ocean that reflects the huge sun. There is a corrugated mirror, that rough surface which reflects a distorted sun. There is a smooth surface that reflects a perfect sun. All these reflecting media are different, and because the reflecting medium is different, you see plurality, you see diversity. So the moment a reflection takes place, whenever there is a reflecting medium, the reflected sun loses its original properties and takes to the properties of the reflecting medium. So this mighty sun, which is, 50,000 degrees centigrade, reflected in a dewdrop, becomes powerless, no energy, no light, little thing. So it takes to the properties of the reflecting medium. When you understand this about human beings, you don't get carried away by the gunas, you don't get affected by the gunas, you don't get traumatized by the qualities. You're able to see through, you understand these are the gunas separate from the original identity of the person, which is Atman. And what a relief it gives you. then you're able to achieve that state of samam and sarvabhuta hite rataha. Because it doesn't matter to you what the gunas are. Just as when you understand the mighty sun, it doesn't make a difference whether the reflection is in a dewdrop or in a lake or an ocean or a distorted mirror. Whenever you see a reflected sun, you know it's that mighty sun above. You don't identify with the reflecting medium. And if you're able to live this in your life, if you're able to assimilate it and operate on it when you're dealing with human beings, what a relief. You remember we saw one slide where it says your interactions with the world will be completely free from friction. Only when you are able to separate. 30, the last verse.
साधिभूताधिदैवं मां साधियज्ञं च ये विदुः प्रयाणकालेऽपि च मां ते विदुर्युक्तचेतसः.
Those who know me along with Adhibhuta, presiding over elements, Adhidaiva, presiding over gods, and Adhiyajna, presiding over sacrifice, they of steadfast mind know me even at the time of death. So now he is giving an assurance that all of us are going to meet with death at some time or the other. And at that point, you have to leave behind everything. Your wealth, your name, your position, your status, your assets, your acquisitions, even your family members. And proceed where you don't know. But there is one thing that you carry along with you, and that is your spiritual assets. That's what he's saying here. They of steadfast mind know me even at the time of death. So even if you haven't reached the state of realization, a certain level of development that you have achieved, you carry that forward and you are born in the next life exactly with the same assets. Now, what an unintelligent life we need. First of all, we don't know when we are going to meet with death. And when we meet with death, we know we can't take any of this. And yet 100% of our energies, our time, our resources are used in what? Acquiring worldly things which you can't carry forward. So what he's saying is, along with all this that you're doing, invest a little bit of your time and effort in acquiring spiritual assets which you can carry forward. Prayana kale, even at the time of death. Then he says, te viduhu, ye viduhu, te viduhu. What must you understand? He says, adhibhuta, lower prakriti. He's summarizing this chapter. You remember in the beginning, we started with an analysis of the world. Lower prakriti, the 5 elements, which means gross matter, subtle matter, physical body, mind, intellect, and ego. Adhidaiva is subtle body concerning gods. Adhiyajna is the Atman, the higher prakriti. You remember he then goes into a description. Sutre manigana iva. It is like the thread through which pearls are strung. That substratum on which this entire universe is projected, that is Adhiyajna. So matter is Brahman, spirit is Brahman, the individual is also Brahman. So you reach that state where whatever you see, whether it is matter, individual or spirit per se, you understand all 3 are nothing but Brahman. Then he says, ye viduhu te viduhu. He who understands, understands. What must you understand? It's like looking at a person who doesn't understand anything. He sees ice and believes that is different from liquid water, is different from steam. So he sees separateness. But you and I know that ice is also H2O, water is also H2O, steam is also H2O. Their properties are different. Their manifestation is different. But essentially, chemically, all 3 are the same. Ye viduhu, te viduhu. One who knows, knows. Even at the time of death, they know me. So the investment of thought and energies has to be long before death. You can't say, okay, when this is what people think. What are you doing when you're young? Why are you studying the Gita? When you're in your deathbed, you can think. But it doesn't happen. Because at the deathbed, you will think only of that which you have thought during your lifetime. You know, there was a lawyer, a very conjuice lawyer, who wanted to acquire wealth all the time. And then he got a terminal disease. So he told his wife, he said, go to the bank and withdraw all the money, all my assets into cash. Put them in bags and keep them in the attic so that when I die, on my way to heaven, I'll carry it with me. And the poor man went through his disease and died, and the wife was most distraught. 6 months after his death, she was upstairs in the attic clearing up things. Suddenly she discovered all this money lying there. She had assumed that this man must have carried the money with him. Then she understood, I made a terrible mistake. I should have kept these bags in the basement so that on the way to hell he would have carried it with him. This is it. So, where do you begin? How do you begin? You begin with the 3 practices of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. You begin by giving. You remember that receptionist, hospital receptionist we spoke of? 15 years ago, she gave 2,000 rupees to a gentleman. And how much did she get back? 7 lakhs. What an investment. Similarly, friends, keep investing, keep giving. When we say giving, we're not speaking of unintelligent giving. You must fix a higher ideal and pour out your energies towards that. Act in a spirit of giving at all times, and by God, you'll get it back. We come to the end of the chapter. Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Supanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Jnana Vijnana Yogo Nama Saptamo Dhyayah. As is the tradition, when we conclude a chapter, we believe that we have only begun our study and not ended it. So all of us together, to signify that our study has begun, we will chant the first verse of the chapter together once.
Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Maya Saktamana Partha Yogam Yunjanmadashrayah Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yatha Jnasyasi Tachrunu.
Now, you know, at the end of the Gita, 18th chapter, the last verse, Sanjaya speaks towards the end. Sanjaya is the commentator. He's telling the blind king Dhritarashtra all the happenings that are taking place in Kurukshetra. So he gets so inspired with this entire message that Krishna has given Arjuna that he goes into raptures. And the last verse, he gives a promise to all of us. And he says, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, wherever there is a Krishna, who is the master of yoga, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, wherever there is an eager student, an active, dynamic young person, Tatra Shri Vijayo Bhuti Dhruvani Tirmatir Mama. Sanjaya says, there will be prosperity, Shri, there will be victory, Vijaya, there will be, what else? Shri Vijayo Bhuti, there will be glory, and there will be justice.